Now we're going to begin Lamed Dalet Amud Beis, but first, the last line on Lamed Dalet Amud Aleph is the Mishnah that addresses the case of peros. Peros, when you can eat peros in one of two ways. You can either eat them natural, like figs, natural figs, or you can heat them up and dry them and eat them as dried fruits, dried figs, in one example. Now, on Erev Yontif, he began the process, which he didn't complete, of drying the fruits. Right now, they haven't been dried fully. Most people would not eat them as is because they're in that state. They're no longer natural and they're already kind of sour until they really fully dry. But there are people that would eat them if need be. The Od Amar Rabbi Eliezer, in addition to what we learned on Daf Lamed Gimel, that Rabbi Eliezer allowed you to break off a kitzeh if it's in his house and he wants to make it into a toothpick to remove something between his teeth, he's allowed to do that. We have another leniency of Rabbi Eliezer, which is now codified in our Mishnah, Omed Adam ala Muktzeh. And here we turn to Daf Lamed Dalet Amud Beis. Now, what is Muktzeh? Not to be confused with Muktzah, although there is a certain striking similarity, but Muktzeh means he decided to set aside these fruits to dry them. He wants to eat them as dried fruits. And Rabbi Eliezer says that a person on Erev Shabbos could stand right near his peros that are muktzeh, and right now most people would not eat them because he has designated them to dry, but they haven't yet dried. And once he stands next to these fruits, he has decided that, you know what, he is going to use them and eat them on Shabbos. By doing so, he has hazmana, he has designated them for use on Shabbos, and he circumvents the Isur Mukt. And all this goes on b'Shvius. Why b'Shvius? Because forget about Shvius for a moment. We'll come back to Shvius. Let's say it's one of the first 6 years of the Shemitah cycle. These fruits are tevel, which means he has not yet been mafresh maseh. And therefore, he will not be able to eat them on Shabbos because there's a shvus, the Rabbanon, that prohibits being mafresh maseh on Shabbos. So there's no mafresh maseh on Shabbos. Hence, these fruits, insofar as they are tevel and require afresh, and there's no possibility for afresh on Shabbos, are prohibited. He can't eat it. So the fact that he's standing next to it on Erev Shabbos and saying, well, I'll eat from these fruits, that's meaningless. However, we're talking about Shvius, the 7th year. And we're going to learn later that we derive from a pasuk that Shvius is potem in a masros. And on the 7th year, you don't have to be mafresh maseh from that fruit that has kedushas Shvius. In effect, then, we're talking about fruits that can be eaten. There's no halachic prohibition except for muktzah. But if he's standing next to his fruits on Erev Shabbos, and he takes a look at these fruits, and he says to himself, I'm going to eat that on Shabbos. It's going to be fully dried by the time lunchtime on Shabbos comes around. And V'yomer, he makes a declaration, from these fruits, then a muktzeh means they've been designated for yibush, to dry them, but they haven't been dried yet. I'm going to eat from these fruits on Shabbos. Says Rabbi Eliezer, that's mutter. The Chachamim Omer, they disagree. Ad sheyirsham, he's got to not just designate them with a verbal declaration, but he has to put simanim on the fruits, separate them from the other fruits, v'yomar, and then declare mikan. So it's not just enough that he stands next to the fruits. There's a massive amount of fruits which he can't possibly eat on Yontif, on Shabbos, and make a statement, Mikan Aniocha. He's got to do a simon, in which case he separates that portion of the fruits that he will eat, hopefully on Shabbos, from the other remaining bouts of the fruits. Now, this machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim recorded in our Mishnah is almost identical to a machlokas that we had back on Daf Yud between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai about birds. You may recall that one shita was that he just looks at the birds and he says, those are the birds that I'm going to shecht on Yom Tov. And the other shita, Beis Hillel said, Beit Shammai says, no, that's not enough. You have to take the birds into your hands and take a look at them and, and designate them with a physical action. Okay. Now, from this point until the end of Daf Lamed Daled, and to go into Daf Lamed Hey as well, we are learning the laws of Masechet. And you might want to know, why are we learning Masechet Masros, which belongs to Zroim, in Beitza, which belongs to Moed? But you'll only know the answer to that question if you stay with me till the end of the shir, because ultimately we're going to go back to our Mishnah about the Muktzeh, and we're going to shed a light on an issue in Masros from a diuk in our Mishnah. Okay, so what's going on with Masros? Masros, when they apply to, let's say, grains, or for that matter, to grapes or olives in Eretz Yisrael, of course, then halacha is that don't make a mistake that as soon as I cut off the fruits or the grains from the ground with harvest, it automatically becomes tevel and it's obligated in maser, and heaven forbid, I'm not allowed to eat tevel. No. There are two other conditions that have to be fulfilled before it becomes tevel and before the chiyuv maser is chal. Number one, we need what's called gemar malacha. So after he uses the sickle and he cuts down these grains or fruits, he's got to pile them up, and that's called gemar malacha. And a second condition, he needs re'iyas pnei habayis. He's got to take these fruits or grains after gemar malacha and bring it into his house. However, although on a doraisa level, according to Torah law, he would be allowed to eat from these fruits or grains until after gemar malacha plus riyas pnei habayis, the Rabbanan made a gzera, and they said that even before gemar malacha and riyas pnei habayis, you're not allowed to eat from these fruits or grains, what's called an achilas kera. You're allowed to eat an achilas aroi, something very temporary, and that's fine, but the Chachamim prohibited you from eating an achilas keva. However, within the context of this heter permitting achilas aroi and prohibiting achilas keva, there are what's called kovim. Kovim means something that substitutes for re'iyas pnei habayis, gemar malacha plus re'iyas pnei habayis. For example, we have something called chotzer. Chotzer technically is not the bites, it's his backyard. But once he gathers the fruits in his backyard and his intention is to eat those fruits, then you're not allowed to eat from those fruits, even in achilas aroi, because chotzer is kovas. I add a tough at the end because the word chotzer is in the feminine. There's another halach called Shabbos kovas, that on Shabbos, all these leniencies which the Rabbanan allowed you to eat achilas aroi, they don't apply on Shabbos. Now, in the case of, let's say, figs that we mentioned earlier, the process of preparing figs and the gemar malacha thereof requires that after you cut down the figs from the fig trees, If you decide that you don't want to eat the figs in their natural state, you want to dry them, so you leave them in the sun, and after they get dried up, you pound upon them, pulverize them, and you make it into a kind of a circle, which is called igule dvela. If you remember Elumitzias from fourth grade, you may remember something called igule dvela. Those are ground pounded figs. They used to make it into a kind of a circle. And that's called the Gemar Malach. Okay. Now, our Mishnah is going to address the case of te'edim of figs that were prepared for eating on Erev Shabbos, but they didn't reach the state of Gemar Malach on Erev Shabbos. So the final Gemar Malach was on Shabbos itself. However, let's say he made a decision on Erev Shabbos that he's going to eat it even before it dries up. Would he be allowed, at least Achilas Haroy, on Shabbos? Or shall we say that Shabbos is Poveh? Tanan Hasan, we learned in the Mishnah, in the fourth parak of Masros, Tinokos, young children, they decided that they were going to eat on Shabbos from these figs in their natural state, Tamlu, Te'enim. So they hid away the Te'enim somewhere in the fields, or maybe out in the garden, they Erev Shabbos. And they had decided they would eat these figs on Shabbos, so they hid it on Erev Shabbos. It's like children who hide candies, you know. And nobody remembered that they have to be mafresh, trumas and maisros from these fruits in order to allow eating them on Shabbos. And as we said earlier, you're not allowed to be mafresh maser on Shabbos. Midrabon. Is therefore the Motzi Shabbos lo ye'achlu ela im kain isru. Now, what's the chiddush here? On Shabbos, you can't eat it because it's tevel, that's for sure. But now we're saying that he can't eat it even on Motzi Shabbos. Why not? We're talking before he's mafresh maser, but again, it's before the Gemar Malacha, and you're allowed achilas haroy. No. In this case, you're not allowed achilas haroy either. Even though they never took the figs into the house or into the chutzah, they were out in the fields or in the gardens. So they didn't have neither Gemar Malach nor Riyas Pnei Abayis. There should be a heter to eat it haroy after Shabbos, of course. On Shabbos, he has a problem because he can't eat it, it's tevel. But the answer is, since they were designated and put away for Achila Shabbos, then any Achila is now considered Achilas Keva. It's not Achilas Haroy. Shabbos has that power to transform an Achilas Haroy into an Achilas Keva. So we see from this Mishnah in Masros that when you have Peros that Nigmar Malachtam, and in this case, since the children said they decided they're going to eat from these Peros as is without drying, there is a Gemar Malacha, then although there was no Riyas Pnei Abayis, and therefore L'chora you should be allowed an Achilas Haroy at least, but nevertheless Shabbos is Koveh L'mas. We have no proof with regard to Perot Shalom Nigra Malachta, whether or not Shabbos is Kovas. Utnan Nami, but we have a Mishnah in the third parak of Masros, Hamavir Te'enim B'chatzero Liktzos, he spreads out his figs in the backyard, in the courtyard, in order to dry them. And he wants to make what's called ktzios in Hebrew. Ktzios are those round pounded figs. is banav upnei beso ochlem emaroi upturim. The members of the household are allowed to eat an achilas haroi. They don't have to be mafresh maser, because since he decided that he wants to dry them and he spread them out in the yard to dry them in the sun, there was no gemar malacha. And if there's no gemar malacha, then chotzer is not kovas lamaser. Chotzer could be a substitute for riyas pnei abayis, but not for gemar malacha. And in this case, since he needs to dry them, and that's what his decision was, therefore, until they dry, the chotzer is not kovas. So we see from this last Mishnah in Mases Per Gimel that chotzer is not kovas l'maser before gemar malacha. Now the Gemara wants to know, what about Shabbos? We might say that Shabbos has the same din of chotzer, and it's not kovas if there's no gemar malacha. Or perhaps Shabbos is even better than chotzer. Whereas chotzer is not kovas until after gemar malacha, Shabbos is kovas even on Peiros before gemar malacha. Boy b'nei Rav Rav Nachman, Shabbos Moshe Tikva Muktzeh. Muktzeh means that there's no gemar malacha because it hasn't yet been dried. L'maaseh v'davar shalom nigmar malachta. Can Shabbos have the power to be kovas and to generate an iser of achilas aroi? Even achilas aroi becomes prohibited because of the power and the agency of Shabbos as a kovas lemaser, even though it's before gemar malacha, and that would generate an iser achilas aroi. Mi amrinon, shall we assume that Shabbos is very powerful? David the Siv, Yeshayahu Hanavi Perek, the famous Perek Nun Ches. Barasal Shabbos Oneg. There's a mitzvah to eat on Shabbos. Good food.
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated. My computer sucks. I think we may have that you?
Rabbi Burzon, we can't hear you.
Omeid Adam al hamuktzeh erev Shabbos b'shvius, and he makes a declaration mikan ani ochel moch. So on erev Shabbos during the Shvius year, he declares this is what he's going to eat from, and we're talking about muktzeh. Muktzeh means pero shadayin lo nigmar malachta. It's before Gmar Malach because he wants to dry them out. And yet, the Mishnah says, time of the Shvius, the reason why he's allowed to eat from this is because it's Shvius and there's no chiyuv trumas and masros. The la barisurehu, and this is derived from the pasuk in Shmos Perikov Gimel Parshas Mishpat Vashvius Tishmatenu V'Natachla V'Chalta V'Yochlu Avyoni Amcha, etc., and it says Chayas Asodema Chayal Chelas Lo Maser Vodem Ochel B'Shvius Lo Maser. So there's no chiyuv maser during Shvius. So Mar Zutra is going to derive from our Mishnah, from Va'od Omer Rabbi Eliezer, Omeid Adam al Hamuktzeh B'Erev Shabbos B'Shvius. The implication is that he, in this Davar Lo Nigmar Malachto, he's okay on Shabbos of Shvius, but time of the Shvius, the La Bar Yisureu, there's no chiyuv masers during Shvius, as we derive from a pasuk. But Shar Shnei Shavua, the other 6 years of the Shemitah cycle, is Hachi Nami, the Asur. Shall we say that it's Asur by Diuk in our Mishnah on Shabbos? Why? Because these are Paris Muktzin, and even though he was mazmin them, he expected to use them. That's because it's not usable because you can't be mafresh, trumas, and maestros on Shabbos. My timer. So why is it that on other years of the Shemitah cycle they become chayv and maser? After all, there was no kviyas for maser, and we're talking about muktzeh, which means lo nigmar malachton. Why would there be a chiyuv of maser? And the answer has to be la mishum the Shabbos kava, because Shabbos itself is koveya even on perush lo nigmar malachton. The Gemara rejects it. Lo, not true. Shiny hasam. The din is different in that case. And what you have died from the Mishnah and in other years other than Shvius, it's awesome to eat them. Even achilas haroy is kevan di omar mikan. Mikan ani ochel machar kavale. The kviyas is not Shabbos. The reason he's kovel amas is because he made a declaration mikan ani ochel machar. He was korei shem achila by virtue of his verbal declaration. But it could very well be, if he hadn't been korei shem achila b'diburo, if he had just designated for Shabbos without mentioning it that it's an ochel mikan ani ochel, it's very possible that he would not be chayiv in maaseh because it's before Gmar Malacha, and Shabbos is not koveah before Gmar Malacha. So Gemara says, if you're telling me that, then my area Shabbos afilu b'chol nami. This Mishnah doesn't belong to say their moed; it belongs to say their zrayim, because this halach even on chol, that during your Chol, if you are korei shem achila on peros, that's kovel l'maser. So if you're telling me there's a new chiddush here in our Mishnah in Beitza that kriya shem ochel is kovel l'maser, that doesn't belong to Masechta Beitza, that belongs to Masechta Masros. So it should have been mentioned and located in its place in Seder Zroim, in the dinim of Masros. And then here in Masechet Beitza, you could have had a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim about hachana for muktzah in a case, for example, of gozlos, of birds. Why mention Maser over here? So it really seemed from this that the reason why he's chayav in Maser is because Shabbos is koveah. The Gemara answers no. The truth is that the reason why he's chayav in Paris Maser is because of his dibur, and not because Shabbos is kovas for Maser. The Mishnah is located here with regard to Shabbos. Why not tell me in general Chiddush in Masros that the dibur of Ochel is self kovel Maser? Or Kamash Malon, the Tevel Muchan Hu Eitzel Shabbos. The Chiddush of our Mishnah is to teach me that payros that are Tevel at the time of Knisas HaShabbos are not Muktzah. It's Muchan for the entire Shabbos. And what does that mean? What do you mean Muchan? You can't eat it anyway because it's Tevel. But the answer is Im Avar V'Tikno. If he violated the Shvus D'Rabbanan of Chachamim that prohibit being mafresh Maser on Shabbos, then Tikno Metukan. The Afrosh is valid, and he's allowed to eat from those payros. He should have done so, but we're not going to penalize him. We're going to allow him to eat from the payros. And this we're going to derive from the fact that the Tana was very medagdik in his lashon in Shvius. He used the word lechatchila. He didn't say im amad adam ala muktzah. He said omed adam ala muktzah be'erev Shabbos b'Shvius v'omer. That's a lashon of lechatchila. And now we can be medayik that in other years lechatchila shouldn't do it lo yamod v'omer kaf, because if he's going to say so, he's being koveh the peros for Maser, and he's chayav in Maser because of his dibur. And if he eats them, then he's eating tevel, obviously. But if this Tana would have held that in other years, if he's omed ala muktzah and he's masbin lachil Shabbos, then his hazmana wouldn't work even to the evet to be mafkia the iser muktzah because of the iser tevel, because tevel is muktzah. Then he should have used the language of b'di'evet. He should have said, Misha Amad al hamukta, Omed al hamukta, the Erev Shabbos v'Shvius, the Omer Mikana Niochel Machar, Harezim and Amuchan, implying that that's a b'di'evet in Shvius, but had it been any of the other years of the Shemitah cycle, then it would be also the Paris are not Muchan, even though he was master the Paros, because they're mukta, because of the Isur Tev. Therefore, we have to conclude that the Chiddush of our Mishnah, although we're not holding that Shabbos is Kovas before Gmar Malacha, but we are holding the Chiddush of our Mishnah to be that the Dibur itself is a Koveah. Again, that's not relevant to Shvius because in Shvius there's no Chiyuv Maser, but as far as another year is concerned, at least L'chatchila, it would not function as a hazmana because l'chatchila you're not allowed to be mafresh maser on Shabbos. He went ahead and he was mafresh maser on Shabbos. Then we say tevel muchanu eitzel Shabbos.